more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. At a Christian Science Monitor roundtable Wednesday, AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka told reporters that there were racists in Trump's White House. Trumka says some of the racist White House aides actually had some policies on trade and infrastructure that labor could support. But Trumka says labor won't work with racists. Now Trumka says the Wall Street wing is dominating Trump's White House, the opposite of what Trump promised during the campaign. Some striking IAM Local 701 auto mechanics are returning to work at several dealerships in Illinois after those dealers reached independent agreements with the union. Those dealers left the new car dealership committee in the face of strong union solidarity as the auto mechanics strike enters its second month. Uncompensated work time for the mechanics is a big strike issue. The strike is hurting dealerships financially. Local 701's Sam Cicinelli says that management attempts to break the strike by using unqualified employees to work on customers' cars isn't working out so well.
One of the service writers tried to change oil on a Honda and forgot to put the oil in the car. The customer got about 3 blocks down and called the dealership back to say he heard a funny noise in his car and subsequently caused the motor to lock up, and they had to replace that to the tune of well over $10,000.
Los Angeles, Orange County's Building and Construction Trades Executive Secretary Ron Miller is proud of a program the trades unions are working on that gives career opportunities to former felons leaving the prison system. The Apprentice Boot Camp program graduated its 3rd cohort this week, and the program will continue.
A lot of these guys are kids. They went into the penal system when they were kids because they made wrong choices, or, they never got the first chance in life to do good. And so they've been in the jail system for a while, and they come out, and they're getting their first chance now at a good, solid career in the construction trades.
Miller says his unions are in the midst of the biggest construction boom since the 1920s, and the trades need more members to fill their ranks. So the trades will continue to be part of this effort to give released felons a hand up toward a second chance in life. One of the graduates of this program this week said the unions are a brotherhood that he is so grateful to have helping him. Miller says that the unions are a brotherhood, and the building trades accept people from all walks of life.
The unions are a brotherhood. In the jail system, they have a brotherhood. They stick together. In the military, they have a brotherhood. They stick together. And so it's not much different. It's a good support system for folks that need it, and it helps them to work together as a team to succeed.
WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers. Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The big disaster still going on, but here's the thing: the reality, the hope. The cleanup begins, and you look at by the numbers, And just, honestly, just amazing amounts of devastation in what they're saying is the 500-year flood. I've heard the 1,000-year hurricane, all of this. The amount, 52 inches of rain. 52 inches of rain, more than 25 trillion gallons of water have fallen on Texas and Louisiana. Some, 13,000 people rescued, more than 30,000 people who are going to lose their homes or forced out of their homes, seeking other accommodations, and more than 35 people who have been killed, and the countless others who have been injured. And you look at this, and it's one of those moments of national unity. And good on the National Nurses United, who through their registered nurse response network are sending more than 1,000 registered nurses to the affected areas to help folks get the help, the care that they need to make sure that, especially people who are at the margins, that they get the attention that they need. And, look, I can't imagine what these folks are going through. I cannot imagine what these people are going through, to be honest with you. The worst thing that ever happened to us, was, a number of years back, we had a fire where, we lost just about everything. And, I remember, not feeling completely hopeless, but, virtually everything we had was ruined. And, we were still in some bit of control because, look, the rest of society around us was still functional. We were able to find a hotel. We were able to begin to rebuild our lives. My wife and I, I think we lived in a hotel for like almost 2 months before we finally bought another house and began rebuilding. It may have even been longer than that. But I can't, and while the loss was there, because it's just stuff. It's just things. And you could go, oh, well, it's all of our memories and our pictures and, our family heirlooms and, all of that stuff. And, yeah, that's terrible and tragic and horrible. But I can't imagine, the feeling of, everything that you own has just been washed away. And everything that of your community is broken and in tatters. I saw a report that, there were some like 9,000 people sleeping in the George R. Brown Convention Center there in Houston. And you go, imagine the community of your neighbors who, used to live next door, now on the cot or on the floor or in the chair, just trying to get some rest and trying to figure out how they're going to rebuild their lives. And, I remember going back to our fire and, one of the things that we had to do, and looking back on it, it was kind of therapeutic, is that we had to go through the remains and, find, what we had and, dealing with the insurance company and all of that stuff, which, to their credit, they were fantastic. I can't imagine having that on such a large scale and having to deal with the bureaucracies that we know are coming and deal with the kind of cheating and the kind of graft and the kind of, just the worst among us that's coming out of this. And, I spent, last night thinking about and remembering that period in my life of going, I just, while it was horrible, it was perfect. It was manageable. And I never felt despair. I never felt hopeless. These folks have lost everything. And a lot of them have lost jobs, have lost, their incomes. I can't imagine that sense of, and how the feelings go. And it's one of those things that, you look to your leaders. You look to the people that you put into, and this isn't a partisan thing. You look to the people who are supposed to be there in your time of need, in your hour of need, and you look for that direction. And, what's frustrating to me is, I watched President Trump's speech, And maybe he was somewhat empathetic. Maybe he somewhat sympathized. Maybe on the inside, way down deep, I don't know. Maybe there was something there. On the outside, it looked like it was all about him. Yeah, what a great crowd. Thanks for coming out. We'll be here on Tuesday. And then yesterday, we see the big tax cut speech. And you go, wait a second. These are our Republican friends are the ones who are saying we're going to cut $1 billion from disaster relief accounts to pay for this wall. And now you've got this disaster, and you go, okay, well, reverse that. Come out and say, look, we're going to fund what it takes. We're going to have to raise revenue. Where are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have to ask our business partners. We're going to have to ask the very wealthy. We're going to have to do something. No, that's not what he did. He came out and basically said, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut corporate taxes down to 15% from 35%. So eventually, we'll actually be paying corporations to be here. And, I was reading through some of the speech from Missouri and going, is this just not the most tone-deaf kind of time where you're talking about cutting taxes on the very wealthy? You're talking about taking out a Democratic senator there out of office and Claire McCaskill. It's business as usual for them. And you go, at some point, do we not realize that there are people hurting? There's misery going on. And what we got from President Trump was, hey, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's a once in a lifetime chance, once in a generation to deliver real tax reform. He said, and this just again, I'm so tired of this line. He said, quote, lower taxes on American businesses mean higher wages for American workers. And, I heard him say that. I saw it in writing. I still can't believe that in this day and age someone will still say that, because there's nowhere in civilized society where that has actually happened. I don't know what planet, look, if Trump was serious about raising wages, there are ways to do that. There are most certainly ways to do that. Giving the very wealthy more is not the way to do that. If Trump was really, honestly, truthfully serious about creating jobs and good paying jobs, we would rebuild our infrastructure. I mean, one of the stories coming out of Houston is that the infrastructure there that was to protect them from these storms was built in the 40s. You go, the last time we had a real major push to upgrade our infrastructure as a national policy outside of, Eisenhower's highway system. But, a national plan, a national strategy. It's the last time we really, really seriously invested. And look, we're still reaping those benefits. And thank goodness that generation did that. But it's really just bizarre. And the tone-deaf messages that we get out of the right, and I'm really tired of these right-wing talking heads and these pundits like Ann Coulter chiming in saying, I think it was Politico who said that, can we now start talking about climate change? She said, I don't believe Hurricane Harvey is God's punishment for Houston electing a lesbian mayor, but that is more credible than climate change. And you go, really, are you that tone deaf? And the answer is yes. One, yes. But two, and more importantly, you get these people who they just need to be outrageous because they need that attention. And she is what she is. She's, there's that oldest profession. She's below that. So our hearts, our thoughts, our prayers to the people of Houston. And look, if you can donate, if you can help in any way, now's the time. This is the time to show national unity. If Trump and the Republicans aren't going to do it, we should be the ones to help. But again, it's my view. You call your representatives, you push you make sure that they fund this. Anyway, got lots to talk about today. The tax plan, or lack of one, high on the agenda. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Sarah Kendzior is going to be here to talk about the president being in her home state of Missouri. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment's gonna bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open, we've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the Battle of Blair Mountain raged in Logan County, West Virginia. Members of the United Mine Workers of America were attempting to organize the mine fields in the southern part of the state. The efforts to bring workers to union was met with violent resistance. The miners armed themselves and marched south. As many as 10,000 miners joined the march. They met armed company men at Blair Mountain. In the battle that ensued, 1 million rounds were fired. The mine owners even hired private planes to drop bombs on Union miners. The U.S. Army intervened and the battle ended. Despite not being successful in their march, the bloody battle brought national attention to the violence in the coal fields. But that was not the last battle for Blair Mountain. In 2011, there was a proposal to bring mountaintop removal mining to Blair Mountain. This type of mining blasts off large chunks of a mountain surface to get at the coal seams below. Protesters stood against the proposal. They argued it would be environmentally devastating to the area. They also argued that it would blast away one of the most important sites of labor history in the nation. Some coal miners took exception to the protests. In a CNN documentary on the conflict, one union miner said, quote, "Mountaintop removal is what built this house, sends that little girl to school, provides insurance for my wife." But another miner joined in the protest against removal. He told CNN that miners had been, quote, brainwashed to think, oh, I can't have a job unless it's a mountaintop removal job. In 2014, the state prohibited surface mining at Blair Mountain. For now, but that is subject to change. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Website, ricksmithshow.com. So another disaster hitting the U.S. And thank you, President Trump, in the form of your trickle-down economic scheme. And again, you know, much like the president does, there are not a lot of details. Not much there. Not much there at all. But again, we know what's going to happen. We know it's going to be more tax cuts for businesses, more for the wealthy, and less for working people. And look, the people in Houston, I fear that a lot of this comes on their back. It is just insane. But here to talk about the president being in her home state of Missouri, I've got Sarah Kendzior, journalist and friend of the show. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So the president was in your neck of the woods.
He was, yeah. Unfortunately, he was in Springfield.
You couldn't keep him?
No, I was pleased that he left, you know.
So what did we think of the grand plan?
I mean, as you said, you know, there really isn't a plan here. I thought it was very interesting that Trump had the audacity to pose some sort of economic plan harkening back to the Reagan era in Missouri, since one of his key financial advisors was Carl Icahn, who purchased TWA and basically, you know, cost thousands of jobs and tons of money for Missouri because TWA was centered here. It was an important They've lowered the minimum wage. They are making it possible for you to get fired at work if your boss knows you're on birth control. They've handed over all of our voter ID info to the Trump administration. And keep in mind, this is a state that wouldn't comply with Real ID laws in order to fly on an airplane because they didn't want to violate citizen privacy. But they're perfectly fine giving all of our voter data to Trump. And so they've done a lot of shady stuff. Just yesterday, a Missouri representative called essentially for people to be lynched after they spray painted a Confederate monument. It's absolutely extreme. But I don't think that this legislature is representative of the people of Missouri. I think you find a very wide array of opinions, a very wide political spectrum, and there was a lot of protest. People came out to protest Trump in the Ozarks. There was thousands of people there in Springfield. And so I think, that is Missouri to me. It's a mix of people, and it's a very resilient state. It's a state that fights back, and they're going to continue to fight back.
Yeah, let's hope they find some measure of sanity. But, in that legislator's defense, he was just being the cowboy of the Capitol. Come on.
Yeah, they all have these, these delusions of grandeur. A lot of it is really race-based targeting. They're currently targeting my state senator for something that she said on Facebook, where she said she hoped that Trump should be assassinated. And obviously, that's a terrible thing to say. She shouldn't have said that. But the way they're targeting her, she's a black representative who was Ferguson, who's brutality, who's fought against poverty, who's fought for more environmental protections. Like, this is just, a targeted campaign and very typical of the way they behave, which is not to look out for the people of Missouri and their interests, but just to get in these little political infighting, and, that's often very polarized along racial lines.
Yeah, but at the end of it, while we're watching this train wreck, and while all of this chaos is going on, as we've talked about in the past, you've got this, this grand theft going on, this massive heist. In the latest bit, yesterday with his speech, with the tax code, we're going to lower corporate taxes down to 15%. They already don't pay. Many corporations don't pay anything, and nobody pays the 35%. Will at some point we be paying them for them to be here, for the privilege of us having them here?
That's essentially what they're looking for. They're the ones who tend to get bailouts while ordinary people are suffering. And, this isn't new. This has been doing for very long time, and it's the kind of policy that has allowed people like Trump and his backers to thrive by taking advantage of this, these cuts to the most wealthy people in the country instead of, a social safety net for the rest of us. And they just have absolutely no shame. There's no accountability. And, what I worry about is because of gerrymandering, because of voter suppression, because of things they're devising, like this voter fraud committee that's going to disenfranchise people, they can put these policies forward because they assume that they have a lock on power in the years to come, and that even if citizens are really upset with them, which, even in Missouri, in red states, they are upset with them, it doesn't matter to them because they just assume they're going to win through cheating.
Yeah, I look at you bring up the Kobosh Commission and the cross check, which is just to me the next scheme. You go back to the 2000, the voting while black in Florida. You go to 2004, the caging that was going on, and then the voting machines and the voter ID and all of these things. It just seems like one scheme after another, specifically to hold down the number of people, especially those poor people who get to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. It's devised that way. And I think, keep in mind the number of poor people in this country has steadily grown. The number of people who are in the middle class that are no longer, they don't consider themselves in there. And also it's reflected in their wages and their savings. Most people don't have $400. And so, the majority of this country is in a lot of trouble in terms of just staying afloat. And the Republicans exploit that. We certainly know Trump exploits that. And, a lot of people fell for that faux populist rhetoric because I think they wanted so badly, to believe that someone had their back. I don't quite know why they would believe Trump did. I kind of watched this happen in Missouri where initially folks were very suspicious of him. The Republicans who I knew wanted Ted Cruz, who obviously is no model of, empathy and looking out for the people. But, he's not known as a guy who went bankrupt multiple times and, does a bunch of, international shakedown schemes. But people, when they're feeling desperate, they want to believe in that, and that's unfortunately, that's not what they're getting now, and it's not what they're going to get in the future if the GOP continues these extremist policies and also continues to try to suppress votes.
Yeah, as a friend of mine said, a drowning man will grab onto an anchor. Out of desperation.
And it's sad to see. It hurts everybody. It hurts the Trump voters too. It hurts absolutely everybody.
Yeah, and I look at what he tried yesterday, and again, it's back to that kind of false populism of and the line that just I'm stuck with today is that lower taxes. He said lower taxes on American businesses mean higher wages for American workers, and I'm going, I don't know how you follow that on a map because in nowhere in human history has that been the case.
It's not the case, and they're just hoping that, people will not bother to, use common sense or apply basic research to this. Like, just this morning, the Missouri GOP tweeted out this tweet of thanks for Trump and said, it's time for the average worker to get a raise. And this is right after they lowered the minimum wage in St. Louis from $10, which people had worked very hard to get it to, all the way back to $7.70 an hour. Like, that's an enormous difference for people. That means people can't pay their rent, can't pay their utilities, can't buy food, can't buy diapers and things for their kids. And they just did that. Yet they're out there saying, we're going to get a raise now. Like, it's absolute crap. And I think people can see through that. Like, it's so stark. It's such obvious bullshit that, people will not fall for that. This is the show me state. I think that, we have been shown that the GOP legislature, lies and is not looking out for Missouri people.
I hope you're right because, all of these myths and all of these schemes and, lower taxes or higher wages. If you give rich people more, it'll trickle down eventually because eventually their pockets will fill. If we deregulate, it'll create jobs and not kill workers. All of these things we keep hearing time and time again, and they keep being proven wrong.
I think that, people are reluctant sometimes to support policies that go against those things that want to repeal, that sort of logic, because that's attached, to Democrats who they don't trust for various reasons or who they have differences of opinion with on issues like guns or abortion. But, people want to be able to survive. People want to be able to make a living. They want jobs and opportunities. And I think, there's a lot of folks that just feel absolutely disillusioned with this whole process. They feel like no one on either side is looking out for them, and that they're just seeing their livelihoods getting swallowed away. That's part of what caused this election. I mean, a lot of things caused Trump's win. It's not down to that, but that problem still remains. It doesn't get talked about as much because we're dealing with rising autocracy, but it's still there and it's still very severe.
Yeah, I mean, like I said during the campaign, I mean, the anger is real, and the question is what do progressives, what does the labor movement, what do the sane, rational among us do with that anger once the enraged figure out that the Orange Menace is not the guy who's helping them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've always predicted that he's going to just create a scapegoat in minorities, in foreigners and immigrants, which is what he's done. He did that recently in some of his speeches. And, I also think the progressive movement has a problem because they've embraced this narrative that Trump and people on the right have put out of the average low-wage worker being a white man who works in some sort of, industrial area, an area kind of like, St. Louis, honestly, where a lot of factories have gone out of businesses, where in reality, the average low-wage worker is often, black or Hispanic and working at a place like Walmart, working in the service industries, working for fast food. And there really has been a strong labor movement growing over the last 4 years. You see that in Fight for 15 and stuff. And, this emphasis on kind of the typical type of worker of the 1970s and 80s versus, what is the actual typical low-wage worker now, I don't think is productive for anybody. So I really wish kind of, the Bernie wing of the Democrats would understand that and, not kind of embrace the myths that Trump and his people are putting out.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the right has always done a masterful job of dividing, and we've also done a pretty good job of dividing ourselves, thus being conquered. Because I've said, look, the wealth class, they're smart enough to know how to pit us against one another. Male, female, white, black, it doesn't matter. Blue collar, white collar, pink collar, ring around the collar. They've figured it out masterfully.
Yeah, and it's depressing. And, in my state in particular, you see this. Like, where they lowered the wage from 10 to 7 is in a state where minimum wage workers are black. And most people in the Show Me 15 movement, which is, our state version of the movement to have a $15 per hour minimum wage, are black. And the way the Missouri legislature acted was to punish black workers. And that's something that unfortunately, a lot of folks who are also suffering themselves economically are willing to overlook. And they're not willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with those workers, even though those workers are facing the same plight. And, that's a real shame. That's something I think, we all need to work to change.
I'm with you on that. Let me change gears for a second. I wanted to get your thoughts on the report that the Mueller investigation and the Mueller team is teaming up with the New York Attorney General to look into Manafort. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I assumed all along that was happening. I think that what happened yesterday is they confirmed that publicly. And the reason they confirmed that publicly is because there's been so much speculation about what presidential pardons are going to mean in the future after Trump pardoned Arpaio. Everybody was like, is he going to pardon Manafort or Stone or Jared or himself, or others who are involved? And I think this sent a signal that, sure, go ahead, try to pardon. And of course, when you accept a pardon, you're essentially admitting to the crime. And then you'll go on and be prosecuted by the New York State Attorney General. And since a lot of these crimes have to do with money laundering through New York real estate or with mafia dealings in New York State, I think there's a high chance that a lot of these people will be prosecuted anyway. So if you're Paul Manafort, and you're reading the news, I think you're picking up different signals. You're picking up something from Arpaio and his pardon saying, okay, we're cool, you're going to coast through. And then you're getting a total different signal from Mueller saying, no, good try, you're screwed. So, that's something for all of them to process.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that and I'm going, because I was expecting the pardons. This to me seems like maybe not going to happen. And I also wanted to get your thoughts on the Trump Tower Moscow.
Oh, the emails and the machinations of Michael Cohen and all that. Yeah, I mean that's so complicated. The players like Trump has had this weird relationship with Russia where he's received a massive amount of Russian investment in terms of people backing up his New York properties, which generally were failing, and possibly using things like his casinos as avenues for money laundering. But he's never actually launched a product in Russia. He's done things like, obtain trademarks, as if he's going to, but didn't. And, I don't quite know exactly why that's happened, especially since he's been in a relationship with, the Russian government, with Russian oligarchs for 30 years. I think that that's something that will come out during the investigation. But I thought Felix Satter's email was very interesting. I thought how blatant it was interesting. They literally put Putin Trump in the subject line. We know, Satter is a colorful guy. He's worked for a variety of people. He's worked, for the Russian mafia, and he's also worked as an FBI informant. And so it's difficult in that context to characterize what is the intent of writing that kind of ridiculously blatant admission of collusion in an email form that could likely be intercepted. So I don't know quite what he was up to, but it certainly looks incriminating for the Trump campaign. And of course, the fact that Cohen followed up and emailed Dmitry Peskov in Russia makes it look even worse. So this just adds, to their bravado, their audacity, and their stupidity that they've exhibited as they ran this campaign in coordination with various Russian players.
Yeah, and these are the people who are in charge of our government. These kind of
actors. Yeah, in charge of our government, in charge of natural disasters. I mean, it's just, good God, yeah, it's depressing.
Well, like they say, may you live in interesting times. Sarah, I appreciate the time. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Always great. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report. I'm Mark Boulanger. The Global Union, which represents food, farm, hotel, and restaurant workers, is holding its International Congress in Geneva this week. The IUF represents 2.5 million workers in 130 countries. The 500 delegates attending the Congress have been debating a number of issues, including the rise of precarious work due to technological change. Sue Longley, the IUF's Deputy General Secretary, opened the discussions about the growing insecurity of employment.
Quantitative issues, digitalization, robotics, and artificial intelligence, we know will combine to make many service and manufacturing jobs scarcer still. And it's really a stretch to believe that new jobs created will either qualitatively or quantitatively compensate society for the jobs that will be lost. As a result, the issue of how society will handle the growing gap between jobs available and those needing jobs and able to work is now preoccupying increasing numbers of peoples and organizations. This in large part explains the growing debate around some form of universal basic income. Universal basic income providing income to all in society, whether in waged work or not, is becoming a mainstream discussion. 10 years ago, it would have been unheard of, but now, controversial though it is, the fact is that it is on the table, and at least some level of recognition that we face a societal challenge that ultimately needs a political solution. In the meantime, we are faced with the struggle to defend what we have, again, quantitatively by fighting job losses, and qualitatively by transforming unstable jobs into proper stable jobs with dignity and paying decent wages.
One of the delegates attending the IUF Congress is Tim Kennedy, the National Secretary of Australia's National Union of Workers.
Our union in Australia represents workers who make, pack, prepare and deliver the food that we eat every day, all the way through the supply chain. Many of these jobs for many years created opportunity and security and a measure of prosperity for many of our members. But not anymore. For an army of workers in Australia, there is a big risk shift from capital onto individual workers in the form of insecure work in all its forms. 40% of workers in our industries are in some form of insecure work now. And this is not just an economic inequality issue, but it's a power issue for our workers and for our unions. In Australia, we have a crisis in organised labour. Private sector union density is now below 10%, at 9.5%. Union density in insecure work and labour hire workers is 4.6%. And for many years, my union, the National Union of Workers, failed to deal with this fundamental issue. And 5 years ago, in order to be a union that could build power again and change workers' lives, we began a campaign that we call Jobs You Can Count On. It was our response to the challenge that the union needs to grow, that workers need to lead on their issues, and we need to rebuild union power. It was fundamentally a growth campaign based on building solidarity between all types of workers. We were not going to be the National Union of full-time workers, we were going to be the National Union of all workers. And we focused on being a union that is grounded in action, building solidarity between all types and groups of workers, irrespective of what employers call them, to be able for them to organise themselves to lead on the issues that are important to them. And I believe we've been successful in doing that. It transformed our union industrially, where we now stand with workers, recently arrived migrants to our country, and they stand together with workers who've been in our union for many years, and we organise around secure work. And it's an important change for our union. We started this in the workplaces, and then we moved it into the community. We made common ground with community groups.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. The IUF Congress runs until tomorrow, September 1st. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Just a day job that someone's got to do. It's kinda hard when everyone looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good like any
Yesterday, The Guardian had an article that I found quite interesting. The headline, Right-Wing Alliance Plots Assault to Defund and Defang Americans' Unions. And look, it's what we've been talking about here on the program for a very long time. They have, I guess it was like 6 years ago here in Pennsylvania, the State Policy Network, group here, the Commonwealth Foundation, came out with Operation Goliath, where they were trying to raise like $2.5 million to go after the public sector unions, to go after AFSCME and the state workers. And, they went into this, and it was like, they were honest. You give them credit for a bit of honesty. They went through exactly what they were going to do. What their organizing aims were to crush those government unions, to roll back worker protections, to lower wages, to assault the pension funds, basically to make those jobs, horrible again. And thus creating, not just an environment of chaos, but also an environment of profitability to where you could privatize all this stuff because they believe nothing should be in the hands of we the people. And what we see now is, with this article that they've pointed out, with documents from the Center for Media and Democracy, which we've had here on the program a number of times, that they're raising more money on the same kind of plane as Project Goliath, only on a national scale. Because understand, the State Policy Network, this group of 66 state-based thought idea factories, think tanks, who come up with they sit around and do nothing but figure out how do we destroy working conditions? How do we make things worse for others and better for us? How do we enrich the people who are funding our $80 million a year operation? How do we make sure that the billionaire class gets more, that nothing is in the hands of we the people, everything's privatized? Because they have this free market ideology that everything should be done for profit. Nothing should ever be done. Nothing should ever be done for the common good. And I love the rhetoric around unions. We love unions, sure, when they have no power. When we can kick them and we can make all of the problems that happen their fault. And they've done a great job. Look, the labor movement in this country has done really a poor job of defending themselves in the social media arena, in the thought arena. When a factory closes down, it's not because some greedy board of CEOs and board of directors and shareholders said, hey, we can make more profit moving south by exploiting those workers and getting cheaper wages and no health care and no pension and worse working conditions. Nobody points the finger really at them. It's those greedy workers who wanted a reasonable wage. And I point to the place, in my little community. Carlisle Tire and Wheel was in this community 93 years. 93 years. The workers were unionized. They made it was like $16 an hour with reasonable bit of health care, a little bit of pension. It was a good job. That was too much. Too much. Moved down to Tennessee, where the state of Tennessee gave them a ton of money. And $10 an hour, no health care, no pension. Was it the union's fault for demanding better wages, hours, conditions? Was it their fault? Well, the messaging is, yes, they should have taken the $10 an hour. There was when Lear was bought out by IAC, the workers there were making like $15, $16 an hour. And the company came and said, yep, we're moving to China or moving to wherever, unless you give us major concessions. And the union sat down and go, okay, what are the concessions? We want $8 an hour. We want a concession of $8 an hour. So you're going to go from 15 or 16 down to 7 or 8. Basically a minimum wage job. What used to support a family is now poverty wage. Was it the union's fault for saying no? And I'll be honest with you. I actually met a small business owner. We used to go to his restaurant all the time. Who told me that the employer was perfectly within their bounds to take that back and that the employee should take it or go find another job. And as I tried to explain to him, the reality is that $8 that the company's taking back, clawing back from their workforce, is his money. It's the money that people had in disposable income to go sit at a diner and have breakfast or lunch or whatever. And not shortly after, that business moved out of the area to China or wherever it went, his business went belly up too. Because guess what? People didn't have money to support that small business. And, I go back to the moneyed interest of this country, the wealth class of this country who fund these kind of groups, be it the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Commonwealth Foundation, or, we were in Connecticut, it was the Yankee Institute. They always take up such really cute names. But they're all across this country, and they never stop. They never stop. They never stop pushing bad policy. I think of, the Richard Mellon Scaifes of the world. And, the famous, story there is Scaife, a billionaire from the Pittsburgh area, basically funded the entire Pittsburgh, is it the Pittsburgh Tribune Review? Yeah. Basically funded that, which is a right-wing rag, and would give money to the National Review. Like, here's $1 million, a couple $1 million, go cause trouble. Nobody ever reads the National Review. But it's that place where those people who are looking to destroy the 20th century, to destroy the working class, the middle class, that prosperous working class, where they go to float their ideas. And then when crisis hits, as Milton Friedman said, never it's the ideas that are laying around that are used when a crisis hits. They've got all these bad ideas laying around. So when they create these crises, for instance, when they defund the pension system of public sector workers, not just where I live in Pennsylvania, but all across the country, they've got several bad ideas of how to, one, make it worse, but two, make it profitable for Wall Street and for the folks who are funding these bad ideas. And the thing that gets me is, right now during the Labor Day, time, we're talking about, work, we're talking about inequality, we're talking about all this stuff. Why aren't we talking about this every day? It's not just at Labor Day when we should be talking about mass inequality. It's not just at Labor Day when we should be talking about the assaults on labor unions. Understand, when we were in Wisconsin in 2011, I remember predicting that this was going to be a wave that was going to sweep across the country. When Walker got away with, and the Republicans got away with ramming through Act 10, this was going to be the playbook, and it has been. I remember coming back to Pennsylvania and having a labor leader tell me, no, that's not, this is Pennsylvania, that's never going to happen here. Guess what? It's all here. They don't seem to run out of time or money or bad ideas. And in Wisconsin, for instance, the public sector union membership, the union density in the public sector for Wisconsin dropped by 40%. Immediately when Act 10 was passed, it dropped by 80%. They've only gotten some of that back. Their ability to fight for better opportunities diminished. And that's the play. That's the plan, to make things worse. And it's going to be you and I, the people who, it's going to be people who don't have union jobs who are going to have to defend the union the most. Because once those good paying jobs are gone, they're just going to keep going down and down and down. And they're still going to blame the unions for it. It's still going to be their fault. But there'll be no way to fight back. And that, to me, a real problem. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Oh, what is, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1864. That was the day the final battle of the Atlanta campaign began with the Battle of Jonesboro. The Union had been embroiled in a civil war with Confederate forces to end the slave labor system for 3.5 years. It had been a difficult summer. Battles were increasingly bloody, with casualties on both sides numbering into the tens of thousands. Criticisms intensified against key Union generals like Sherman and Grant. Pressure mounted against President Lincoln to end the war and withdraw the Emancipation Proclamation if necessary. General William T. Sherman mounted the Atlanta campaign earlier that year in May. His forces scored a number of victories throughout the summer, but could not decisively defeat Confederate forces. By August, Northern morale was so low that the Republican National Committee deemed Lincoln unelectable. The Democratic National Convention, convening in Chicago, had declared the war a failure and planned to ride to victory over Lincoln in the November elections. But Lincoln's commitment to emancipation was unwavering, and Sherman did not disappoint. He understood that Atlanta was, as historian Eric Foner describes it, a key railroad hub and the communications and transportation center for the entire Southeast. Sherman's forces had been marching down from Chattanooga for most of the summer. Finally, they marched to the south of Atlanta to cut the last key rail line. And on this day, Union forces positioned themselves at the Flint River and at the Macon and Western Railroad. Over the next 2 days, they would successfully beat back multiple Confederate assaults, destroying the rail line and forcing Confederate forces to abandon Atlanta. The city was now fully under Union occupation.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Remember when the Gulf nation of Qatar was blockaded by Saudi Arabia in early June? Egypt, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates also joined in on the blockade, closing their borders, stopping direct flights to Qatar, and suspending diplomatic ties. The stated reason for the punishment was Qatar's support for extremist groups and for Iran. Well, after several months of negotiations to try and end the dispute, Qatar's foreign minister signaled Wednesday that the country is prepared for the standoff to drag on, and that diplomatic initiatives hadn't made any headway. Academics in Qatar have even tried to put a positive spin on the crisis, saying that efforts by Saudi Arabia to persuade other countries to join the blockade have failed, and that sanctions could actually make Qatar stronger by serving as a reason to solidify ties with its partners. With the United States taking a back seat in negotiations to end the standoff, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited the region this week and emphasized the need for a negotiated settlement. He also threw Qatar a useful lifeline, saying Moscow was eager to invest more in Qatar's oil and gas sector. And the U.S. dollar continues to slip against the euro as Europe's common currency reached an 18-month high this week. Industry and consumer economic confidence in Europe has also hit new highs not seen since 2007. Far from Brexit sucking the oxygen out of Europe, the momentum seems to be behind the European Union now. The good news for Europe coincides with increasing investor unease in the United States amid diplomatic uncertainty surrounding North Korea, and signals this week from Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen that further interest rate hikes are not currently on the table. As of press time, $1 US is worth just 0.84 euros. At the start of the year, the two currencies were trading at close to 1-to-1. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Minimum wage!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you? It's like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Show.com. So I got to remind you that the state of Missouri, they passed one of those preemption laws specifically to lower wages for workers. And today, the Republican Party of Missouri tweets out that they're all in favor of higher wages. President Trump, through his tax cuts, are going to higher wages. I mean, it's really this kind of bizarre falling down the rabbit hole, alternative facts, alternative reality kind of stupid show that I hope somebody now starts watching. I mean, it's really just blows my mind. And speaking of things that I hope people will stop watching is Fox News. A new Fox News poll out says 40% of those polled say that the media poses a greater threat to the United States than white supremacists. Let that sink in for a minute. Go ahead, let it sink in. Just a little bit. It reminds me of the Chris Rock bit. About, the media's coming. Oh, Chris Wallace, run. Yeah, I'm not buying it. Now, the other side of that is that 47% say the white supremacists are much greater risk. And, for me, it was one of these moments where mission accomplished, fake news. You lathered up your base. You lathered up and this is one of those weird things because Fox News is the media. So you've got these people who are saying, in essence, that Fox News is the enemy, a greater risk than the white supremacists that they promote. It's really bizarre. And when you break down the numbers, of those who believe white supremacists are worse, 13% of Trump voters say, yeah, it's white supremacists are worse, greater threat. 80% of Clinton voters. The news media is worse, a great threat. 75% of Trump voters, 10% of Clinton voters. And you got to know that those 10% were looking at Fox News. Another Fox News poll out, released just yesterday, 56% of Americans say that Trump is tearing the country apart. Put me in that 56%. 33% say that he is drawing the country together. Again, we must be watching completely different realities. Fox News is framing it as, he's the great uniter. Democrats, 93% overwhelmingly say that Trump is dividing the nation. You've got 15% of Republicans that are saying, yes, he is dividing us. 53% of independents, and those are the important ones. Look, you've got the right and the left. You've got the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're going to, for the most part, stay. It's that 5% in the middle that decide every election. It's those independents who, they have no ideology. They have no real core values. They're swinging back and forth based on, how their life is going, how things are going. So when Ronald Reagan said, are you better off 4 years ago now than you were 4 years ago? This is that kind of thinking. Those are the people that appeals to. Now, 68% of Republicans, like I said, said he's drawing the country together. And as I said, they must be watching Fox News. Bad news for the Trumpster. The Fox poll has him 41% approval rating, 55% not approving. So the ratings of this reality show, not good. Not good. Lots of buzz, though. Lots of people tweeting and checking his tweets and all of that. But the folks who say that they're enjoying it, not so much. Not so much at all. Interesting, we brought this up a little bit earlier, but there's a state senator there or state representative in Missouri who, this Warren Love, and you got to love that, Warren Love, who shared on Facebook that someone who vandalized a Confederate statue in Springfield, he wrote, "This is totally against the law. I hope they are found and hung from a tall tree with a long rope." And when asked about it, he said, it's just an exaggerated statement. Didn't really mean it. It's a Western term. And I'm the cowboy of the Capitol. It's a Western term. It's a Western term. I would argue that's kind of a Southern term. Just kind of a thought. Going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit about inequality, how do we close the gap? How do we change this massive gap between those who have so much and, the rest of us? Quick break, right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. At a Christian Science Monitor roundtable Wednesday, AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka told reporters that there were racists in Trump's White House. Trumka says some of the racist White House aides actually had some policies on trade and infrastructure that labor could support. But Trumka says labor won't work with racists. Now Trumka says the Wall Street wing is dominating Trump's White House, the opposite of what Trump promised during the campaign. Some striking IAM Local 701 auto mechanics are returning to work at several dealerships in Illinois after those dealers reached independent agreements with the union. Those dealers left the new car dealership committee in the face of strong union solidarity as the auto mechanics strike enters its second month. Uncompensated work time for the mechanics is a big strike issue. The strike is hurting dealerships financially. Local 701's Sam Cicinelli says that management attempts to break the strike by using unqualified employees to work on customers' cars isn't working out so well.
One of the service writers tried to change oil on a Honda and forgot to put the oil in the car. The customer got about 3 blocks down and called the dealership back to say he heard a funny noise in his car and subsequently caused the motor to lock up, and they had to replace that to the tune of well over $10,000.
Los Angeles, Orange County's Building and Construction Trades Executive Secretary Ron Miller is proud of a program the trades unions are working on that gives career opportunities to former felons leaving the prison system. The Apprentice Boot Camp program graduated its 3rd cohort this week, and the program will continue.
A lot of these guys are kids. They went into the penal system when they were kids because they made wrong choices, or, they never got the first chance in life to do good. And so they've been in the jail system for a while, and they come out, and they're getting their first chance now at a good, solid career in the construction trades.
Miller says his unions are in the midst of the biggest construction boom since the 1920s, and the trades need more members to fill their ranks. So the trades will continue to be part of this effort to give released felons a hand up toward a second chance in life. One of the graduates of this program this week said the unions are a brotherhood that he is so grateful to have helping him. Miller says that the unions are a brotherhood, and the building trades accept people from all walks of life.
The unions are a brotherhood. In the jail system, they have a brotherhood. They stick together. In the military, they have a brotherhood. They stick together. And so it's not much different. It's a good support system for folks that need it, and it helps them to work together as a team to succeed.
WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers. Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Website, thericksmithshow.com. Our quote of the day comes from Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO. He says, whether it's raising wages, paid leave, gender and racial equality, or simply the freedom to negotiate for a better life, unions are needed now more than ever. He said, we can help deliver the economic rules working people are hungry for. And look, as we move towards Labor Day and Labor Day approaches, we're seeing more and more stories that remind us of how past generations, our grandparents' generations, with their high union density, had better wages, hours, conditions, that there was a broad shared prosperity. That for that little gap between the end of World War II and the middle 70s, we led somewhat similar lives. And we didn't have this massive inequality where the top 10% is taking almost as much as they did back when the robber barons ruled the roost. And, more for them, less for us. And we're seeing this inequality continue to grow. And the question is, how do we change that? How do we turn this around? I've been saying for a very long time, we need a resurgence and a more militant labor movement. But here to talk about his ideas, I've asked Chuck Collins. He's the director of the program on inequality at the Institute for Policy Studies. Chuck, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, great to be with you.
So, you see this massive gap, and there's a graph we use all the time, just to illustrate how wide the alligator's jaws are and how wide the difference between those who have and, well, the rest of us. How do we close that?
Well, the first thing is to realize people are recognizing inequality, but there's a fair amount of snake oil that's sort of being proposed as to how to fix it. So you hear people say, well, this is a result of technology and globalization, and if we invest in education and job training for workers, then they'll catch up in terms of wages. And I think it's just important to say, look, this is about power. It, just as you said, the declining union power means that the productivity gains have not been shared with wage earners and workers for almost 40 years. The bottom half of wage earners have not shared in the economic growth of the last 40 years. And that's directly because of that power imbalance. And then the rules of the economy have been changed to benefit asset owners, wealth holders, at the expense of workers.
Right. So when President Trump says the economy's rigged, and he goes on that line, Chuck, that the economy's rigged, and I'm going to be the guy fighting for you. Yet his solution is more tax cuts for the very wealthy, and he actually said this: we have to have tax cuts so that the employers will raise wages.
Yeah. His speech yesterday was a remarkable statement. We're going to cut taxes on corporations, and that's going to help the workers. That's going to help stagnant wages. And boy, have we been here before? This is the classic trickle down. But it also just ignores the evidence. We just released a study yesterday that looked at the 92 most profitable companies. These are companies, by the way, that are swimming in cash. It's not for lack of cash that they're not making investments. They don't need additional tax cuts. But we know that the more their taxes have gone down, they haven't hired. They've been shedding workers, and they've been mostly funneling funds to their CEOs and to their shareholders.
Certainly.
So it's just this, we have to kind of go and talk to our neighbors and explain, look, yes, the economy is rigged. The rules have been rigged against workers. Absolutely. How do we fix that? We increase worker power. We put in place policies that raise the floor and create real opportunity. Cutting taxes for corporations and the rich, the sort of billionaire first tax program, is going to just worsen everything we're talking about.
Yeah, and at the end of it, I look at where the president was yesterday in Missouri. Missouri actually passed a statewide law, a preemption law that says no municipality, city, or subdivision or any smaller government entity can raise the minimum wage. And they actually, by passing this preemption law, stole wages away from workers while tweeting out yesterday that, well, we're glad that the president was here and fighting for higher wages. It's this alternative reality rabbit hole that we seem to have fallen down into.
No, it's crazy. I remember 10 years ago, well, actually, when Hurricane Katrina happened, Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa went on, they were just about to vote on a big tax proposal to abolish the inheritance tax, the estate tax. And Chuck Grassley said, isn't it a little unseemly to be talking about tax cuts for the wealthy, in the middle of this hurricane tragedy? And here we are. We're looking at our neighbors in Houston and what's going on, and we're talking about corporate tax cuts. Like, this is really going to help address the conditions that working people are in, and the kind of level of public investment it's going to require to rebuild our communities. It's completely delusional.
But again, to me, it's two pronged, and maybe you'll agree. One is we need to to get off the couch and into the streets and be a much more militant working class. And two, it's a political problem because we've elected people who are economically insane because we agree with maybe their social positions. And at some point, back to that, what's the matter with Kansas? And, at this point, what's the matter with all of the country?
Yeah, we have to really take a look at how we've been divided and kept from, what we know is people overwhelmingly want to live in a much more equal society. They believe the wealthy should pay their fair share of taxes. We're talking 70-80% of voters polled. They want to live in a country that has a better social safety net through which people can fall. We see Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. It's like he's a socialist now, because he wants to have public investments. That's what happens during natural disasters. These cut government people all of a sudden get a government religion. So So those are we have to come together and realize, we actually are the majority. People who want a more equal, fair, healthy economy are the majority in this country. People believe the rules are rigged against them. They're right. So then it's a matter of just not falling for the diversionary tactics, the scapegoating and blaming, low-income people and immigrants, and all that stuff is a deflection from focusing on the ways in which, we actually agree about a lot of what we need to do. We have to do, like you were saying, Rick, at the beginning, we have to do some of the things that created that shared prosperity between, World War II and the mid-'70s. We taxed the wealthy at much higher levels, and we invested in debt-free education, home ownership, infrastructure. We could do the same thing again. We shouldn't do it in a way that discriminates against people of color, because that unfortunately worsened the racial wealth divide the last time around. But, we could be investing in green infrastructure, things that reduce our dependence on outside energy, all of that stuff, and creating great jobs. We know how to do this, actually.
Yeah, it just seems we've hit this weird political, and I would argue that it's brought on by the amount of wealth, and this is just that kind of vicious cycle. The policies are in place to make sure that the wildly wealthy continue to be wildly wealthy, and even more so by continuing to give them more and more and more that they only turn around and use against us by pursuing politicians and policies and lobbying that would make it that much worse. And it's just this snowball of insanity and destruction that I don't think we can get out of unless we figure out how to get money out of the political system.
I in this paper that we just did, Reversing Inequality, I argue, we can try to raise the minimum wage and we can try to do things, but unless we address the concentration of wealth and power at the top, both in terms of its political impact, what you're saying, we have to break that nexus between money and power, but we also have to tax wealth and kind of bring it back to democratic size. I mean, I think, for instance, if we created in our states and at the national level a trust fund that was capitalized by taxing billionaires and providing tuition-free, debt-free education, you would have the next generation rallying, behind that proposal, and you would have a policy that reduces that concentration of wealth at the top. So we should be looking at things that do both things that lift up everybody, but also reduce that concentration of wealth and power. That's the impasse that you're describing, Rick. And I totally agree. We're stuck until we address the top end of the economic equation.
But some would say, Chuck, look, your background is you were born into wealth. You would be, by all accounts, what I think most people would say, the winner in this economy. Why does this matter to you? I mean, look, you've got a pretty good gig. I mean, as far as most people would say, you're on the winning side of this divide. Why do you care?
Well, this is what, for about 8 months now, I've been out talking not to groups of wealthy philanthropists, Silicon Valley types, basically saying, look, these inequalities are not in anyone's interest. They're undermining the quality of life for everybody, and it's even bad for rich people, believe it or not. I sort of try to make the argument, there are the Koch brothers and wealthy people who use their wealth and power to rig the rules to get more wealth and power. But I'm trying to awake all the people who aren't doing anything, who are just sitting there collecting their dividends, and say, look where we're going. Look at the trajectory. If we play this out another couple decades, we're going to become a kind of racial and economic apartheid society that no one, and your children and grandchildren, will not want to live in. It's not in anyone's interest.
Right.
So I'm trying to make the self-interested case that when you have stagnant wages and it creates volatility, political volatility, that's what we're living through, and it creates economic volatility. It's bad for the economy. If you have a hollowing out middle class that isn't participating in the economy, it's just living by debt, that's going to fundamentally undermine the health of the economy.
And to be honest, we are a nation living on debt. The collapse in 2008 didn't really change that. I mean, for 30 years, instead of wage increases from employers, we got cheap credit, and created this this perverse incentive to have to stay on the treadmill of these bad jobs and not fighting for better opportunities. It just seems, again, one of these weird little little things that have happened to the working class of this country.
Yeah. And, what's interesting is Wall Street understands it. That's why they're not investing in enterprises that are creating jobs right now, even though they're sitting on mountains of cash, because actually they see there's this decline in aggregate demand. Working people, low-income people don't have actually enough money in their pockets to meaningfully participate in the economy.
Yeah, no, I've said for a very long time, I think things only change when there's massive pain. When people, the old labor saying, your stomach's got to be empty before your head gets right. There's one of these moments where you go, the desperation makes, I think, people do things. And on the other side, the wealthy, when they realize that it could be their heads on platters, maybe that's when we go back to that table and negotiate again on how we have industrial peace, shared prosperity, and an opportunity for not just a handful, but for everyone.
What's interesting is that there's this guy, Peter Georgescu, who just wrote this book, Arise Capitalists. Here's a Wall Street guy, big advertising agency CEO, along with a bunch of other people from his crew who are talking about inequality. They're saying we should be raising wages both in companies and we should be raising the minimum wage. Again, making a self-interested case. And my view is, it's about time. We could use a couple hundred more of those folks stepping up and making sure that groups like the Business Roundtable stop funding anti-minimum wage campaigns and the kind of campaign you described in Missouri to preemptively prevent localities from raising wages. That's a sign that some of those people get it. That this is not the road we want to go down.
Yeah, again, it comes back to I think it has to be federal policy. I don't buy into the whole we need to have a little hodgepodge of state rules or let the free market do it. It's got to be an across-the-board policy so that the bad actors don't pull down the good actors.
No, that's the ideal thing. But here we have a situation where, sort of looks like the political system has been captured for the short term. Where the states are important is we can incubate policies, we can organize and get people. Here I live in Massachusetts. We have a ballot initiative to raise the income tax in the state 4% on incomes over $1 million. That will generate $2.5 billion for transportation and education. So we're working hard to pass that, and there's a number of states doing the same thing. Right. It's not the same as you say, Rick. We need to change the federal policies. In the meantime, we can be incubating these good ideas, building pressure, because there is a realignment happening. It doesn't feel like it some days, but there is a fundamental realignment. People understand this is a dead end if we keep going the way we're going. It's a dead end for small businesses, for community economies, to just allow a couple hundred transnational corporations to dominate the economy. And at the federal level, we have to revitalize antitrust.
Absolutely.
This Time Warner AT&T merger that's on the table right now.
I would argue the Amazon Whole Foods merger.
Yes, we're looking at an unprecedented period of corporate mergers and conglomerates. If you're a beer drinker, you should be very worried that two conglomerates control 90% of the beer industry now. They're pushing out the small players, craft brewers and the others, and they're raising beer prices. They have the power. That's what monopolies do. So part of that movement is to say, look, concentrated wealth by the rich, but also concentrated corporate power. We need to revitalize the role of government.
I'm right there with you. So let me ask you a last line of questioning. What's the marching order? Because look, it seems like such an overwhelming. We're just so far behind. There's so much to be done. What do you say to the average person? What's the first step? Because that's always the most difficult.
Well, I think the next big fight is over this tax plan, and I know you've been talking about this morning, but I actually think people should check out Americans for Tax Reform and this Not One Penny movement. And what we're saying is not one penny for tax cuts for billionaires and wealthy corporations. The next fight is going to be over this, attempt, this money grab, if you will, of corporations and the wealthy trying to cut their taxes. And if we can stop that the same way we stop this bad healthcare thing, that will be a huge effort. But it's going to be very, very hard. And but I would say that's one thing. I would just encourage people to kind of roll up their sleeves and get engaged in fighting this tax cut agenda.
Yeah, this is that next fight. My fear has been, and I've said this for a while, the healthcare fight was one thing. People viscerally understood that was an important battle. My fear is that this one isn't as the tax fight isn't as enraging, isn't as sexy, if you will, isn't as important to some. But I say that this is the beginning of how we do turn things around.
I agree. I mean, I think it's going to be harder because you can't say, look, there's 20 million people here who are going to lose their health insurance. It's like one step removed from the urgency and reality. It's like, okay, yeah, down the road, we'll have less money. But it is kind of a key showdown. And that's where I think not one penny of tax cuts should go. And if Trump is out there saying, yeah, look, this is going to be great for the middle class, this is going to boost jobs, we should be holding everyone accountable to those principles. Yeah? Does this tax cut really help working people in this country? Or is it just a wealth grab, really, by the rich? And I think it's an opportunity to sort of contrast those 2 points of view.
Yep. To me, it's just another piece of the kleptocracy. Chuck, I appreciate you taking time for us. I'd love to have you come back again and keep us up to date and fill us in on how we continue to fight this.
Great. Thanks, Rick. And check out inequality.org. That's the place where people can learn more about all these campaigns.
And we will make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Chuck, thank you so much.
Take care, Rick.
Chuck Collins, the director of the program on inequality at the Institute of Policy Studies. We'll get links at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out this stuff. And again, as a guest I had on the show years ago said, you give a rich person a tax cut, they go on vacation. You give a working person a tax cut, they participate in the economy. It just makes sense from a business standpoint. Quick break, right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the Battle of Blair Mountain raged in Logan County, West Virginia. Members of the United Mine Workers of America were attempting to organize the minefields in the southern part of the state. The efforts to bring workers to union was met with violent resistance. The miners armed themselves and marched south. As many as 10,000 miners joined the march. They met armed company men at Blair Mountain. In the battle that ensued, 1 million rounds were fired. The mine owners even hired private planes to drop bombs on Union miners. The U.S. Army intervened and the battle ended. Despite not being successful in their march, the bloody battle brought national attention to the violence in the coal fields. But that was not the last battle for Blair Mountain. In 2011, there was a proposal to bring mountaintop removal mining to Blair Mountain. This type of mining blasts off large chunks of a mountain surface to get at the coal seams below. Protesters stood against the proposal. They argued it would be environmentally devastating to the area. They also argued that it would blast away one of the most important sites of labor history in the nation. Some coal miners took exception to the protests. In a CNN documentary on the conflict, one union miner said, quote, "Mountaintop removal is what built this house, sends that little girl to school, provides insurance for my wife." But another miner joined in the protest against removal. He told CNN that miners had been, quote, "brainwashed to think, oh, I can't have a job unless it's a mountaintop removal job." In 2014, the state prohibited surface mining at Blair Mountain. For now, but that is subject to change. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2. me want to scream when I think of this tax scheme. I mean, honestly, truthfully, it's such a ripoff. Let the kleptocracy begin. And, look, back in November when he was elected, I said, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have a Kofifi ball like Trump and the Saudis. But, I said back, the day after the election, what we're going to encounter, what we're going to see is the largest theft in our government's history. If you think things are corrupt now, wait till Trump and his band of merry criminals get done raiding, pillaging, and stealing from we the people. And the reality is all of that talk about, we're going to make tax reform. What tax reform in Trump world really means is we're going to cut your Social Security, your Medicare. We're going to slash and burn the social safety net. We know that's going to happen because you look at, the tax plan. You're looking at, as the Americans for Tax Fairness folks point out, his plan of what we know. The tax plan giveaway is about $4.8 trillion in tax cuts for the really wealthy and corporations over the next decade. And then you combine that with the budget cuts to Social Security, Medicare, education of about $4.3 trillion. Guess who's paying for that tax cut? Guess who's paying for the tax cuts? We are. The corporate tax cut that he's looking to give away, they say is going to be about $2.3 trillion over the next decade. They point out that the cuts that in the budget that Trump proposed that help working families, job training, things like that, going to be cut $2.5 billion. You go, gee, is there a perverse incentive here? The tax cut that they're going to give to hedge fund managers and corporate lawyers and to Donald Trump himself, about $2 trillion. Cuts to Medicaid, remember that? About $1.9 trillion. And you can go down the list of again, massive, enormous redistribution of wealth. Wealth that, created by we the working people, should be in the hands of we the working people being redistributed up. Where are my Tea Party friends now? Where are the Tea Twizzlers now when the tax system is really being rigged? When the coffers are being robbed at a pace that would make Bonnie and Clyde blush? Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, all of those, they would be embarrassed at what this administration is doing. It is that obscene. And look, as Chuck pointed out, look, we've got to be the ones who stand up, step forward, and fight back in this. And again, my fear has been, and for a very long time, my fear has been that, the healthcare fight was fantastic. People were engaged. They were calling their representatives. They were, tweeting, and they were Facebooking. They were faxing, emailing. They were engaged. They were off the couch. They were in the streets. There were demonstrations all over the country. And I was saying, this is, a great organizing effort. My fear is, the next fight, which is this tax fight, is not as sexy and not as appealing and not as easily understood. The healthcare fight was, we're stealing healthcare from 24 million people. We're going to kill thousands of people. Stealing access to care is going to kill people. That's a very simple path to follow. Take away healthcare, people die. Understand the other side of this. And this tax issue is just as simple. Give these wealthy people more. You destroy Medicare, you destroy Medicaid, you destroy Social Security, you take education from people. You are making people's lives more difficult for one, but you're also killing people. When you take Medicare away, when you destroy Medicaid, it's the same thing as over here. It's just not as simplistic and it's not as easy to define. Which is why I'm glad to see that California Senator Kamala Harris has come out now and endorsed Bernie Sanders' single-payer health care plan. She is now going to be a co-sponsor, and Sanders is saying, look, we're organizing. We're going to be pushing this. And I believe the more we have this conversation, the more we talk about, hey, how do we make sure people have access to good, quality, affordable health care? That when you get sick, you get to see a doctor. When you get sick, you don't go bankrupt. When your kids get sick, you don't lose your house, your job, and your savings. How do we make sure of that? Because look, I've talked to people for years that say, my health care costs are killing me. I was talking to a guy the other night who said, the job that I have, health care for my family is $1,300 a month. I only make $1,000 a week. You're talking about what, like almost $325 a week out of 1,000? It's obscene. It's ridiculous. And he's like, look, nobody's sick. This is the kind of conversation we need to be having with our neighbors, with our friends, and how we make sure that we get the profit motive out of this. And I'm glad to see Sanders is pushing this. Look, I have said from the beginning, I'm a single payer guy. I've been, since the Affordable Care Act was even conceived. This makes sense. And as Kamala Harris points out, it's just not about what is morally and ethically right. It also makes sense just from a fiscal standpoint. It just makes sense. And we've already got the infrastructure there. It's that simple to me. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, you talk about this inequality divide. You talk about, the differences between the haves and the have-nots, the very wealthy and the working class. Childcare being one of those issues that I think extremely important for the working class, especially the low-wage workforce. We hear Republicans all the time say, get those welfare people off the rolls and get them jobs. But we never seem to talk about how do those people find childcare so that they can go to work. When we come back, we're going to talk just about that and how that all works out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
90% of the wealth. 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. 3,500 buses rolled into Washington, D.C. They were loaded with protesters, there to participate in Solidarity Day. The AFL-CIO organized the event to coincide with the Labor Day weekend. They issued a statement, Why We March, outlining labor's demands. The purpose of the day was to bring attention to the concerns of the nation's working people, especially over health care. Other reasons for the march included a call for more public works programs. Another major demand was the end to permanent replacement of striking workers by scabs. Bernie Dinkin, Secretary-Treasurer of the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union in Philadelphia, explained, One of the main purposes for us going down is to let our friends know, our friends in the Democratic Party who are sitting on their laurels, that if they do not support anti-scab legislation, we will vote against them, no matter what they've done in the past. The most important aim of the event was to show worker strength and solidarity. A similar showing of solidarity had taken place in the nation's capital 10 years before. After President Reagan fired striking air traffic controllers, a September 1981 rally had drawn more than 250,000 people. The 1991 action brought out similar numbers. Despite the 95-degree weather, tens of thousands converged on the nation's capital. They came from across the nation and 30 countries. 100 buses and a specially chartered train made the trip from Philadelphia. Noticeable among the crowd were members of the United Steelworkers Union with their gold and blue shirts. 180 different labor, religious, and civil rights groups stood up on that day for the rights of working people.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
So we hear that frame all the time, especially from Republicans. Get those welfare people off the welfare rolls. Get them to work. And, as I was saying, even back when Clinton was doing welfare reform back in the 90s, where are these people going to put their kids? Instead of just having a mandate that you go get a job, lazy person, which is how they love to frame folks who are in those situations. What about the kids? As someone who grew up in a housing project with a single mother, when she went off to work, and understand, the 1970s, completely different era than today. My mother would have been locked up, thrown in jail, the key thrown away, melted down, used for something else because, we latchkey kids of the 70s, evidently today that's a crime. You can't let the 8-year-old go to the park out of fear of being arrested. It's crazy where we've gotten. But again, what's happened on a policy level, we've done nothing to help folks. And here to help us work through some of these child care deserts and maybe policy on how we help people get child care, I've asked Katie Ham to come talk with us. She's the Vice President of Early Childhood Policy at the Center for American Progress. Katie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we hear this quite often, don't we? Get those lazy people to work.
Right, absolutely.
What do we do with the kids?
Yeah, no, I think that's the central question. You have so many families out there who are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're going to work every day. They're trying to earn an honest living for their families. Most families with kids under 6 are working. Both mom and dad or a single parent are working. But they don't have access to childcare. So they're in this bind where they can't afford childcare to work, but they need childcare to work.
Right, but here's one of those things that I've always said. Maybe the first step in this is universal pre-K. Get kids into schooling earlier. Make sure that there's some structure, and not just warehousing kids, but actually having some bit of preparing them for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen a lot of governors actually take leadership on preschool. Congress hasn't acted so much, but we've seen a lot of Republicans and Democratic governors institute preschool in their state so that parents who want it have access to it. The issue is for younger kids, we haven't seen the same kind of investment. So you might have somewhere to send your 4-year-old that provides a good opportunity for them to learn, but the brain development and that really important critical developmental period is actually before kids even turn 3. And that's where we see even more difficulty finding childcare.
So then, I know your study looked at 8 states across the country and broke this down by zip code. And I guess, I don't even really need to know about the zip codes because, you look at the areas that are going to have high poverty, you're going to have less opportunity. The areas that are more affluent, obviously going to have more opportunities. Anything outside of that in your study?
So rural areas are really hard hit by this. So in Pennsylvania, 73% of people who live in rural areas are in a child care desert. So we see a lot of struggle there.
But here again, you could make the argument that rural Pennsylvania, like rural just about anywhere, you're talking about areas that suffer with high levels of poverty and inequality, right?
Absolutely. Yep. No, I think that's right. And then we also found that areas, the Latinos and Native Americans are also really disproportionately impacted by this, which isn't probably surprising for a lot of people in those communities. But when we think about the population of young children, it's increasingly diverse, so we need to make sure that everyone has access to these opportunities.
Now, again, I come back and you said there are a lot of Republican governors who push universal pre-K and all of this stuff. And yet from my Republican friends, all I hear is, those kind of programs, it's just warehousing. It's just, it's just free babysitting. How do you get around this class divide, this class envy, if you will, of, people who are more well off, who can afford, childcare, who can afford early education. How do we bridge that divide of not allowing them to look back and say, "Oh, you're just getting more welfare to the people who are below us"?
So I would argue that children are children. They don't have jobs. They are starting out, and I think as Americans we have to appeal to a sense of fairness. We've collectively decided that we should invest in a K-12 system. Everybody in this country should be able to get a basic education in our K-12 system. The problem is by age 5 or 6, so much of our development has already occurred, and we see about half of the achievement gap that exists in high school is actually already present when kids get to kindergarten. So, if we want people to be able to start on an equal playing field, we need to invest when they're young. And then the other thing I would say is this isn't just about an individual child or an individual family benefiting. This is about our country and our economy as a whole. So, this is our future workforce. So regardless of whether or not you have a child, you have a stake in how this cohort of young children does. And they're the people who are going to be paying your Social Security and be contributing to our economy. So we need to set them up for success so that we're all better off as a country.
Yeah, that's a much harder lift than me. I only care about me, which is where a lot of policy seems to devolve into, or at least that's my thought.
Yeah, and I'm especially concerned as we in Washington start having a conversation about taxes and tax cuts and who they benefit. What the Trump administration has put on the table, a lot of those benefits are really going to wealthy people and not people who are struggling. And we see it in Trump's campaign proposal around child care. 70% of that spending, that $500 billion over 10 years that he wanted to do, would go to people earning over $100,000 a year. So as we have this conversation and as we hear him, as he did yesterday, spew rhetoric on childcare, we need to think about who's that going to, and is it helping struggling middle-class families get access to the childcare that they need just so that they can go to work and do well by their family.
Right, but again, I keep coming back to that poverty issue, and the fact that areas like where I grew up as a kid, that have a high concentration of single-parent households, have a high concentration of extreme poverty. Those programs that assistance wasn't there. And, I think those are the areas that need the help the most. Yet politically, in this environment, it almost seems like that's a non-starter because, look, call it whoever you want, the wealth class, Republicans, whatever. There seems to be this push to divide the working class of this country. And while wages have been stagnant for 40 years and declining, and, we've got all of these problems, it seems like the poor and those who are struggling the most, they're the ones who are always scapegoated. So these kind of programs seem to me to be another one of those moments where, there's another opportunity for scapegoating.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think another entry point for this conversation, though, is when we talk about infrastructure. So we talk about what a communities, what a cities and areas need in order to have a healthy economy. And we often talk about roads and bridges and airports and even broadband. But this is also what communities need. They need facilities and they need resources to make sure children are in safe places that are promoting their development. So I totally agree with you that it is an uphill struggle to frame this in a way that doesn't get exploited by folks who are perpetuating some of those class divisions.
Right, and I'm not asking that to be argumentative. I truly want to know because look, I'm all in favor of the idea of making sure that there are opportunities for kids to get out of poverty, kids like me, because I look at the reality is if I were born into the situation I was born into, back in when I was born way back then. I don't know that path to get out of that poverty is there for this generation of kids. So for me, it's how do we make sure that every child has an opportunity to rise to their talents and has the opportunity to get a good quality education and all of that. And to me, it comes back to the policy parts. So much of our policy lately has been how do we destroy the safety net? How do we punish the most vulnerable? I'm just trying to figure out how do we reverse that?
Yeah, so, I think the budget and tax fight that we have coming up in Washington is going to be really telling because in order to stop that narrative and stop some of the proposals that are on the table, people are going to have to speak up just like they did in healthcare and say, this is unacceptable, this is not fair, this is not right, you're putting people's lives in jeopardy.
Right.
And, CAP the Center for American Progress has a campaign called Hands Off. You can go to handsoffcampaign.org and submit your story about how the safety net and how programs that help people meet their basic living standards like child care and housing are affecting you and try to join this movement to stop that from happening.
Now, again, the hope is that people get involved. And again, I go back and I look at the healthcare fight. I want people to be just as engaged and angry and going to town halls and making phone calls and writing letters that they did against the healthcare thing for things like this and things like the tax scheme that's coming down the road.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like that's exactly how we stop it. It's an uphill battle, but we've proven over the last 6 months that it can work.
The hope is that we get engaged, we get active, and we pursue this. Last line of questioning I've got for you. In looking at a local level, in these desert areas, do you see anything that can be done, immediately outside of our political world that could help these areas? I mean, is there, I love to hear the right wing talk about, well, we need churches to do the charity work, and businesses can do all this stuff. Any area there?
Yeah, the federal government has a small program that funds child care assistance for families now, so states have resources. I think licensing family child care homes in some of these rural areas and providing resources to help people who are family child care providers provide high-quality care and open their homes is an immediate must-do to improve the supply. I would also say there are a lot of parent organizations out there that are working in communities and trying to organize folks to address some of these issues and call on local leaders to address them. So definitely getting involved in the community and asking local folks and local electeds how they're going to address it is a next step.
Yeah, we get angry. Make those angry phone calls. That's my suggestion.
And if you are expecting a child, I would say, as soon as get on those child care waiting lists.
Because they can be long. Katie, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much for the work you guys do.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great talking with you, Katie Ham. She's the Vice President of Early Childhood Policy there at the Center for American Progress. You want to check out their work on child care deserts, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. You can check that out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Trees are green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1864. That was the day the final battle of the Atlanta campaign began with the Battle of Jonesboro. The Union had been embroiled in a civil war with Confederate forces to end the slave labor system for 3.5 years. It had been a difficult summer. Battles were increasingly bloody, with casualties on both sides numbering into the tens of thousands. Criticisms intensified against key Union generals like Sherman and Grant. Pressure mounted against President Lincoln to end the war and withdraw the Emancipation Proclamation if necessary. General William T. Sherman mounted the Atlanta campaign earlier that year in May. His forces scored a number of victories throughout the summer, but could not decisively defeat Confederate forces. By August, Northern morale was so low that the Republican National Committee deemed Lincoln unelectable. The Democratic National Convention, convening in Chicago, had declared the war a failure and planned to ride to victory over Lincoln in the November elections. But Lincoln's commitment to emancipation was unwavering, and Sherman did not disappoint. He understood that Atlanta was, as historian Eric Foner describes it, a key railroad hub and the communications and transportation center for the entire Southeast. Sherman's forces had been marching down from Chattanooga for most of the summer. Finally, they marched to the south of Atlanta to cut the last key rail line. And on this day, Union forces positioned themselves at the Flint River and at the Macon and Western Railroad. Over the next 2 days, they would successfully beat back multiple Confederate assaults, destroying the rail line and forcing Confederate forces to abandon Atlanta. The city was now fully under Union occupation.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Remember when the Gulf nation of Qatar was blockaded by Saudi Arabia in early June? Egypt, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates also joined in on the blockade, closing their borders, stopping direct flights to Qatar, and suspending diplomatic ties. The stated reason for the punishment was Qatar's support for extremist groups and for Iran. Well, after several months of negotiations to try and end the dispute, Qatar's foreign minister signaled Wednesday that the country is prepared for the standoff to drag on, and that diplomatic initiatives hadn't made any headway. Academics in Qatar have even tried to put a positive spin on the crisis, saying that efforts by Saudi Arabia to persuade other countries to join the blockade have failed, and that sanctions could actually make Qatar stronger by serving as a reason to solidify ties with its partners. With the United States taking a back seat in negotiations to end the standoff, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited the region this week and emphasized the need for a negotiated settlement. He also threw Qatar a useful lifeline, saying Moscow was eager to invest more in Qatar's oil and gas sector. And the U.S. dollar continues to slip against the euro as Europe's common currency reached an 18-month high this week. Industry and consumer economic confidence in Europe has also hit new highs not seen since 2007. Far from Brexit sucking the oxygen out of Europe, the momentum seems to be behind the European Union now. The good news for Europe coincides with increasing investor unease in the United States amid diplomatic uncertainty surrounding North Korea, and signals this week from Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen that further interest rate hikes are not currently on the table. As of press time, $1 US is worth just 0.84 euros. At the start of the year, the two currencies were trading at close to 1-to-1. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Good news. Earlier in the program, we talked about the nurses with National Nurses United and their rapid response, sending more than 1,000 registered nurses to the Houston and Louisiana area to take care of the folks who are affected by the flood. On the other side, you have the Koch brother funded state policy network that we talked about earlier, having their meeting in a swanky hotel in San Antonio, trying to figure out and plotting and scheming how to destroy public sector unions, how to destroy those nurses. I mean, it's just one of those interesting kind of, one of those kind of scenarios where you almost can't make up. And, we talked about both of those, the state policy network and their assault on workers and, the rights to organize and all that. It's pretty amazing to me. The Koch brothers, with all of their wealth and with all of their power, we could, if they had the vision like Chuck Collins, Chuck, was born into extreme wealth, I think he's the great grandson of the Oscar Mayer fortune, could easily have been a Trumpian type figure. Hey, it's all about me, screw everybody else. If the wealthy of this country actually cared about this country, we'd be investing heavily. We'd be investing heavily in the best infrastructure of the world. And again, I go back to the Thomas Friedman quote that I use often. When he claimed he said he was going from China to LAX, and he said it's like going from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. The rest of the world is passing us by. And it's because, we're giving our wealth away in the hopes that, and again, I don't even know that it's, at this point, I don't even know that it's hope. I think it's just plain graft. I think it's just a swindle. It's just a heist. I guess you could make an argument back during the Reagan years. You could make the argument possibly that by giving more to the very wealthy, because, look, at that time, you had a different brand of CEO. You had a different mindset in the corporate boardroom. Now, understand, it was changing, and it was changing radically. But you still had some of those old school CEOs who, were making 20 to 30 to 1 difference between their average worker. They were living similar lives. As one person emailed me, the millionaire CEO used to come every day and sit down and have lunch with them in the company cafeteria. They didn't have a gold-plated dining hall just for the executives. They actually came and sat down with the workers, led somewhat similar lives. Their kids went to the same schools, which meant that they wanted better schools, and they invested in those schools. They wanted better roads because guess what? They had to drive on those roads. And they wanted better levees because, hey, they didn't want their house swept away. Now we live in completely different worlds. To go back to the John Edwards frame of the two Americas. Understand, again, John Edwards may not have been clairvoyant or have his hands on the Kofifi ball, but he hit it on the head. The two Americas. Those who are doing wildly well. Those who all of the spoils end up on their plate. All of the wealth, all of the riches, all of the profits, all of the gains, all of it right there. And then everybody else. And then it's the Hunger Games for everybody else. And to varying degrees, some people in the rat race do a little bit better than others, but never going to get to that 1/10 of 1%. Never going to happen. And you look at what's going on, it's really just insane to me. This tax cut scheme, and I always think about things people have said of the past. You give me a tax cut, I'm going to go on vacation. That's what they do. They're talking about repatriation again. We've seen this movie. We saw it during the Bush years. Corporations hoarded trillions of dollars offshore, and we said, sure, bring it on back. Under the guise that we're going to create jobs. Let me remind you of what happened. During the Bush years, we said, yeah, bring it on back. Yeah, come on. We're going to give you a low, flat tax rate. I think it was like 5 or 8 or something percent. It was really pathetically low. And the promise was going to create jobs. It's going to be great. What we know happened, they brought the money back. They gave themselves huge raises. They bought back their shares of stock, which pumped up the price of the stocks, so the CEOs benefited even more. And they laid a bunch of people off. They took that money, they invested in automation. They invested in the next step up of technology and ended up costing, I think it was in excess of 150,000 jobs. We've seen this movie before where we're paying for our own demise. It's like putting the kick me sign on ourselves. I mean, this is what we've done time and time again as a working class. When you start to identify, and as I've said before, it's like a Stockholm syndrome for workers. When you start to identify with the needs of the boss over your own, when you start to think that, you have similar interests, that's when you get screwed the most. Because you don't live in similar worlds. You don't have similar access. And you most certainly do not have similar power. And until we wake up to that reality, this kind of insanity is going to continue. They're going to continue to think that they can keep scheming us with, well, tax cuts are good. Okay, for whom? I agree, tax cuts for working people is a good thing because it puts more money in their pockets. They're able to, put food on the table, put, shoes on the kids, maybe, who knows, maybe go to a diner, keep a small business in business, maybe go to the movies, maybe just, fix up the house. Who knows? But it reverberates through our economy, and it is a good thing. You give the wealthy more, they hoard it. They use it for doing what they do best, making more for themselves. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app. On the smartphone, take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Remember, Saturday, 7 p.m., Free Speech TV. Also, our Labor Day special. We'll be back tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to